Lesson 2-10, Solving One-Step Inequalities by Multiplying or Dividing. So in our last lesson, we learned how to solve inequalities with addition and subtraction. Today we're adding our other two operations. Let's review really quick about equations versus inequalities. Remember that an equation has an equal sign, something like this. An inequality has an inequality symbol, something like that. Equations have only one answer, or solution. Whereas an inequality, if I solve this inequality, I divide by 2, x is greater than 4. X could be any number that's bigger than 4. So they have an infinite number of solutions. So yesterday we did addition and subtraction. The inverse of addition, so to undo addition we subtract. To undo subtraction we add. In today's lesson, we're solving inequalities by multiplying or dividing. So if you see multiplication like 2x, you want to undo the 2 by dividing. Or if you saw something like x divided by 2, I can get rid of the division by multiplying. So those are inverse operations or opposite. Now, the important thing to note about this lesson, it does get a little bit more tricky than adding and subtracting, and let me tell you why. I'm going to use this problem again. 2x is greater than 8. If I want to solve for x, I get rid of the 2 by dividing it to both sides. Keep the inequality symbol, and my answer is x is greater than 4. We know how to do that. The only thing that's going to change is on my next slide. When you're solving inequalities and you multiply or divide by a negative number, the inequality symbol flips. So here's an example. -4 times a is greater than 8. To isolate a, I want to undo multiplication. I want to divide by -4. But when you do this, when you divide or multiply by a negative number, so my 4's cancel, I have a, 8 divided by -4 is -2, my inequality switches directions. A is less than -2. Here's why you have to do this. If I have an inequality 3 is greater than 1, we know that 3 is bigger than 1. What if I multiply each side by a negative number? How about -2? Alright, so this now becomes -6 is greater than 1 times -2 is -2. Okay, look at that inequality. -6 is not bigger than -2. This doesn't work. As you multiply numbers, they get bigger. But when you multiply it by a negative, they are larger negative numbers, which are technically smaller. So I need to flip this sign when I'm dividing or multiplying by a negative number. So that's going to be the hardest part of this lesson, is remembering to do that. Okay? So these are the properties in your book that tell you when you are dividing by a negative number, you switch your sign, and when you're multiplying by a negative number, you switch your inequality symbol. So let's do some practicing. You have a note-taking sheet. Let's fill this out together. So solving inequalities involves isolating the variable and graphing the solutions. So in example 1, they are multiplying by 4, so we, to undo that, are going to divide by 4. The 4's cancel. I have y is greater than 20 divided by 4 is 5. Now I didn't have any negatives, so I don't have to worry about changing my sign. This is my answer. Y can be anything bigger than 5. I'm going to graph it on my number line, open circle to the right. Next example. -18 is greater than or equal to 5 times x. Alright, so I look at the variable. They are multiplying by 5. We are going to divide by 5. Now, some people might look at this problem and think they need to change the inequality sign because there's a negative number. Now, if you remember the rule, you only switch the sign when you're dividing by a negative number. So since we're dividing by a positive 5, we don't have to change the sign. It's okay that -18 is still negative. So my 5's are canceling. I have x. Keep the sign. And negative 18 divided by 5 doesn't come out very equally. It's a decimal, negative 3.6. So on my number line, 2 points. X is less than or equal to, so I'm filling it in and arrowing less. All right, I'm going to rewrite this one. A divided by, so it's kind of like this, negative 7 is less than or equal to 56. So they are dividing by a negative 7. We're going to do the inverse and multiply by a negative 7. So as I do this, timesing both sides by a negative number, something in your brain needs to trigger and realize that this inequality symbol needs to flip direction. 7's cancel. A is now greater than or equal to 56 times a negative 7 is negative 392, a really big number. So negative 392 and 0. A is greater than or equal to, arrow to the right. Okay, and in our last example, 24 is greater than negative 8k. They are multiplying by a negative 8. We will divide by a negative 8. Divide by negative 8. Divide by negative 8. Oops, we're dividing by a negative number. Inequality symbol flips. K is by itself, and I have a negative 3. And graphing that one, K is greater than negative 3. So on your bottom, your so what? What's important to understand? When multiplying or dividing by a negative number, the sign must flip or change direction. Okay, so keep these in mind. I'm going to do a couple more examples that you can just watch. 4x is greater than 40. We just want to solve the inequality. Well, I'm going to do the opposite operation and divide by 4. X is greater than 10. It didn't tell me to graph, so I don't need to. All right, B. Here's an example where I see a negative. But to isolate M, I divide by a positive 3, so I don't need to change anything. M is less than negative 7. In this example, I am dividing by a negative number. So T, this sign will flip, and I have a negative 4. So you got to look for those numbers multiplying or dividing by a negative. All right, and these are opposite, so now I'm dividing. So to undo the operation, I need to times both sides by negative 4. When I do that, this cancels. I have my T. My sign flips because I multiplied by a negative number, negative 28. Here we're going to write an inequality for the sentence and solve. A number T multiplied by 7 is less than or equal to, it's important to read all of it, less than or equal to 21. There's my inequality. Now I'm going to solve. I'm going to undo multiplication by dividing by 7 to both sides. I get T is less than or equal to 3. A number B divided by 4 is greater than or equal to 3. To undo division, I'm going to times by 4 to both sides. B is greater than or equal to 12. And finally is a word problem. So being able to write an inequality from a situation. An elevator can carry up to 2,500 pounds, no more than that. Suppose the weight of an average adult is 150 pounds. At most, how many average size adults can safely ride the elevator at the same time? Well, if we're averaging each person to weigh 150, I'm going to times them by X because every person weighs that. We don't want this weight to be more, so I'm going to do less than or equal to 2,500 pounds. Then I'm going to take that and divide by 150 to solve. X is less than or equal to, I get 16 and 0.6 repeating. So I'm going to round that. I can't round it up because 17 people would be too many. So I'm going to round it down to 16 people, always using your label. Okay? This brings us to our lesson check. I'll write that on the top here. Please work through 1 through 5, solving the inequality. I would like you to graph. All right? So you have your notes and these answers.